Hi, welcome to the Prairie Oaks Pulpit Bible Study, and meeting in a different location at our college ministry at the University of Arkansas, the Association of Baptist Students, or the Hedge. And just like to put a plug in for them because they're a good ministry that I've been involved with for almost 20 years now. So we're continuing our Bible study through the Gospel of John, and we're in John chapter 19 now. So John chapter 19, and we're going to look at the first 15 verses. So it's kind of a long reading. John chapter 19. Pilate then took Jesus and scourged him, and the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and put a purple robe on him. And they began to come up to him and say, "Hail, King of the Jews!" and to give him slaps in the face. Pilate came out again and said to them, "Behold, I'm bringing him out to you so that you may know that I find no guilt in him." Jesus then came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." So when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and by that law he ought to die, because he made himself to be the Son of God." Therefore, when Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. And he entered into the praetorium again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "You do not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you, and I have authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no authority over me unless it had been given you from above. For this reason, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin." As a result of this, Pilate made efforts to release him. But the Jews cried out, saying, "If you release this man, you're no friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar." Therefore, when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation for the Passover. It was about the 6th hour, and he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." So they cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So he then handed him over to them to be crucified. So, as you can tell, we're going through the trials of Jesus as he faced both Jewish authorities and Gentile authorities, the Romans. And John didn't focus as much on the trial before the Jewish authorities, except to demonstrate that they were already made up their mind. They were going to have Jesus killed, and they wanted the Romans to do it. Now, his first trial before Pilate, earlier in the morning, Pilate decided he didn't see anything that Jesus had done worthy of being crucified. Because while the Jewish authorities were convinced that Jesus was a blasphemer and should be executed because he claimed to be the Son of God, they knew that didn't matter to Pilate. Pilate wouldn't have given them the time of day. So they brought the charge of sedition and insurrection against Jesus, that he was opposed to Rome. And that would have got Rome's attention. But it didn't take long for Pilate to realize this guy is no threat to Rome and doesn't even think of himself as a threat to Rome. And so when we left off, Pilate was frustrated that he was in this predicament, knew that Jesus was an innocent man, and the people instead wanted a very guilty man, guilty of insurrection no less, Barabbas, to be released to them so that Pilate would have to crucify Jesus instead. And we see this continuing. And so they take Jesus, he has him punished. And it's thought that there was probably two scourgings. One was the milder form before one would be executed or even declared guilty. So this was kind of more of an interrogation thing. And it wouldn't have been as severe, but that's the only one John mentions. But the other Gospels mention the really horrific one after he had been condemned. They really would take out their frustrations against him in a just most inhumane way. And that's what we get in those pictures. And so, but it was designed to humiliate this one in the hopes that the crowd would have sympathy and would want Jesus released after seeing him humiliated and mocked, and that this is one that at least was understood to be the King of the Jews. Wouldn't they want him released? And so he has this done to him, and behold the man. And it doesn't elicit anything but just fuels their fury at him. Crucify him, crucify him. And that's when they throw out, he deserves to die because he claimed to be the Son of God. Now we know, those of us who are followers of Jesus, he is the Son of God. He proved it. He proved it with the miracles. He proved it through the scriptures. He proved it with the sinless life. And never mind the virgin birth, right? And so all these things prove it. And when Pilate hears that, now that means something completely different to Pilate. Because Pilate's not a Jew. He's a Roman. He's a polytheist. He believes in multiple gods. And so for this person to claim to be a god, little g, well, from what he saw, that kind of makes sense. This guy's really different than everybody else. You might remember in the book of Acts that there was an episode where Paul and Barnabas were in a city and they healed a guy. And the people were like, oh, let's worship them. It must be Zeus and Mercury. And so, or Hermes. And they were going to make sacrifices and all things. Remember that story? So this is the kind of mindset that Pilate would have come from. That, well, who knows, maybe the gods do come in the flesh every now and then and just show off their miracles. And you don't want to be the one that treats them wrong, because then horrible things will happen to your city if you treat them wrong. But if you do the right things, then they'll be nice to you. And so he goes back in, he wants to talk to Jesus and make sure he's not making a horrible mistake here. I don't think he was convinced that Jesus is a god, but I think he's still concerned that Jesus is a lot better man than he is, and that Pilate's going to get in trouble for this. Because he gets frustrated. Where did you come from? Well, that's why he's asking that. He's not wondering, are you really from Bethlehem or are you from Nazareth? No. He's worried this guy's really come from like Mount Olympus or something like that, where the little g gods come from. And Jesus doesn't go along. And when he talks about authority, then Jesus gives him a lesson on what authority is really about. Because no matter if you're the boss of your own business, or you are the president of the United States, or a dictator in a powerful country, or anything in between, you all each have your authority on loan from God. And we answer for what we have done with that authority. And that's what Jesus says. Your authority came from above. And because you are going to answer to the one who is above, the ones that delivered you to me are in a lot more trouble with God than you are. Because the reality is, they knew better. Pilate didn't. And that's interesting. One of my Bible studies pointed this out. Jesus is saying here with greater sin, not all sins are the same, not with God. They have different punishments. There's different punishments in this world and in the next, apparently. And so you'll hear people say that, sometimes to excuse their sin. Well, all sins are the same. No, they're not. And we're supposed to shun sin anyways, whether it's a big sin or a little sin. And so Pilate is convicted in this, at least enough to know that he doesn't want to be the one guilty for having Jesus killed. So he makes even more efforts, right? And so then they finally pull the card that works with Pilate, because Pilate may be afraid of the judgment one day, but not as much as he's afraid of the judgment of Caesar. Because if we got the history timeline right, Pilate's friend in Caesar's court got on the wrong side of Caesar and got executed. And so Pilate kind of felt vulnerable anyways. And now when they say, well, you're no friend of Caesar if you're allowing this guy to claim to be king, he's like, crud, now I'm in trouble. They're going to get my head chopped off. And so if it's going to be this way, then he sits down in the judgment seat so that everything's official, and he says, so this is your king. Who would you rather have as king, this man or Caesar? Shall I crucify your king? And the chief priests and the authorities of the Jews say, we have no king but Caesar. He gets them. Now, their loyalty is worthless. Within less than a few decades, they'll rebel against Caesar, and Caesar will send the Roman legions to demolish Jerusalem, just as Jesus foretold. But there's another thing going on in this that I think is important for us to pay attention to. And it's, you remember that Jesus is going through this in our place. Hence the reason he doesn't defend himself. Hence the reason he accepts it. And one of the things he's accepting is humiliation. Embarrassment is an understatement. He'll be stripped naked, if he hasn't been already when he was scourged. They mocked him. They put a crown of thorns on his head and a purple robe, calling him the King of the Jews, but with no respect to those terms. And he took it. He did not defend. He did not lash out. He took it. And so, have you ever been there? Have you ever, maybe not to that extent, but been humiliated? Been shamed? There's a lot of us that carry shame in our lives. Things that we did wrong, and things that we were persecuted having done the right thing, having done nothing wrong, but yet were embarrassed and shamed over it. Jesus knows what that's like too. Jesus says, here's what I did in that circumstance. I trusted God. I trusted the Father to be the one to vindicate me. Jesus endured it all the way through death. Injustice. I was reading an article earlier today about a man innocent and proven innocent by confession of someone else and by evidence. Can't get a new trial. He's been in prison for 30 years. Asks for clemency, doesn't get it. Just continue to be in prison. And it should break our hearts. But Jesus has been there, executed for a crime he did not do. And while that man may not get justice in this life, God will make justice. He demonstrated justice at the cross with mercy as he punished sin thoroughly, but he took it upon himself so that he could show mercy to those who will receive it. Just as he foretold in Isaiah 53 and Psalm 22. And I just wanted to read that because it's significant in this, and that's where we'll finish up. Isaiah 52 and 53. I'm going to start in verse 13 of 52. Behold, my servant will prosper. He will be high and lifted up and greatly exalted. Just as many were astonished at you, my people, so his appearance was marred more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men. Thus he will sprinkle many nations. Kings will shut their mouths on account of him. For what had not been told them they will see, and what they had not heard they will understand. Chapter 53 of Isaiah. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a tender shoot, like a root out of parched ground. He has no stately form or majesty that we should look upon him, no appearance that we should be attracted to him. He was despised and forsaken of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And like one from whom men hide their face, he was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely our griefs he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried. Yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening for our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourging we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. Each of us have turned to his own way, but the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall upon him. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to slaughter, and like a sheep that is silent before its shearers, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away, and for his generation who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, for the transgression of my people, to whom the stroke was due. He took it for us, and he endured shame, sorrow, mockery. If you read Psalm 22, it goes into a lot of details of that. But it was for us, because we're the ones that went astray. And the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall upon him. And he endured it for us. And so, as we read through this is more than just a sad tale of injustice. This is a tale of what we deserved being paid for by the infinite God, who out of infinite mercy and love endured the infinite righteousness of God on a finite afternoon on a cruel Roman cross. And Lord willing, that's what we'll look at next week as we continue our journey through the cross to the crown. God bless, God keep you. Thanks for joining me.